The scholarship letter had creased and unfolded so many times that it was beginning to tear along the fold lines. I had read it no fewer than 40 times since it arrived, sometimes at 2 in the morning when sleep refused me, sometimes on the crowded bus with my worn backpack pressed against my knees, the words running their familiar track through my mind. Full academic scholarship, Ashford University. Enrollment begins the 15th of September. I was the first person in my family to attend university. My mother cried when I told her, pressing her hands against her mouth while her eyes went bright and wet. My younger brother danced in the narrow kitchen of our apartment, knocking into the counter and laughing about it. I stood in the middle of all that joy, feeling something more complicated than happiness, a quiet, gnawing terror that I would fail, that I would walk into Ashford's carved stone archways and be immediately, obviously exposed as someone who did not belong. The scholarship was merit-based, competitive, and fully funded. It covered tuition, dormitory housing, and a modest stipend for living expenses. It also came with conditions: a minimum GPA of 3.8, no academic violations, full compliance with university conduct policies. The conduct policies were where things became complicated for me. Ashford University had no formal discrimination policies against secondary genders. It was not unique in that. Most institutions at least claimed neutrality, though the reality on the ground was messier. Omegas who presented visibly, who had strong scent profiles, who could not afford suppressants, who experienced heats without medical management, often found the academic environment hostile in ways that were difficult to document and almost impossible to fight. I had watched it happen to others. I had no intention of becoming another example. I was an Omega. I had known since I was 15, when my first heat came with no warning and with none of the gentleness that the school pamphlets promised. It had been managed since then with suppressants and careful planning. My scent was controlled. My biology was, as much as modern pharmaceuticals could make it, a private matter. I intended to keep it that way. The dormitory room I was assigned to was small but mine alone, which felt like extraordinary luck. It was on the fourth floor of a building called Harrow Hall, with a window that looked out over a courtyard full of old oaks. The bed was narrow, the desk was adequate, and the bathroom was shared between two rooms with a connecting door that could be locked from either side. I tested the lock 3 times before I was satisfied. My neighbor on the other side of that door turned out to be a tall, easygoing beta named Felix, who played guitar badly and apologized for it constantly. He became my first friend at Ashford, which was convenient and entirely accidental. "You're the scholarship kid," he said on the second day, not unkindly, handing me a mug of coffee through the shared bathroom doorway. "Heard about you. Everyone's heard about you. You got the Kelly scholarship. That's a big deal." I took the coffee because I needed it, and because refusing felt rude. "I'm Sam Mitchell. Felix Wong." He leaned in the doorway with the comfortable ease of someone who had never been anxious about anything in his life. "You know Van Kelly administers it personally? The scholarship? He picks the recipient himself." I did not know that. The letter had been signed by someone in the financial aid office. "The university president?" "The very same. Word is he reviews every application personally, has some kind of personal investment in it." Felix shrugged. "Either way, it means he knows your name, which is more than most students can say." That information settled uncomfortably in my chest. I did not particularly want the university president to know my name. I wanted to be quiet, excellent, and invisible. I wanted to graduate with honors and disappear into a career that would support my family. Being noticed was not part of the plan. "Thanks for the coffee," I said, and retreated to my room. I saw Van Kelly for the first time at the orientation ceremony for scholarship recipients. There were 12 of us gathered in a wood-paneled room that smelled of old books and lemon polish. The chairs were arranged in a semicircle, facing a podium. When the door opened and the room shifted, that subtle collective change in posture that happens when someone with real authority enters, I looked up from the program in my hands. He was taller than I had imagined. Photographs do not capture presence, and Van Kelly had the kind of presence that photographs would actively fail to convey. He was somewhere in his late 30s, dark-haired with the kind of angular face that looked like it had been designed with architectural precision. He wore a dark suit with the quiet confidence of someone who had never once questioned whether his clothes fit the room he was in, because every room he entered became his room immediately. He was unmistakably an alpha. Even with my suppressants running at full effectiveness, even with my scent profile locked down tight, I felt the low, involuntary recognition that omegas are not entirely able to train away. It was not desire. It was more like the way a compass needle moves. Not a choice, just physics. I looked back down at my program and told myself to get over it. He spoke about the scholarship without the usual administrative blandness. He said that excellence did not belong to wealth, that the students in that room represented the most rigorous selection process the university ran all year, and that he expected more from them than from anyone else at Ashford. Not because they owed him anything, but because capability required exercise to become strength. It was objectively a good speech. I did not applaud when he finished. I sat with my hands in my lap while everyone around me clapped, watching him work through the room, shaking hands, saying names. He had clearly memorized every file. He knew who came from where, who had won which academic competitions, who had overcome which particular variety of difficulty to arrive in that room. He reached me last. Sam Mitchell. His voice was lower in person than it had been at the podium. He extended his hand. Biochemistry, yes. I shook his hand briefly and let go. It's a pleasure to meet you, President Kelly. He did not have the reaction most people had to my polite distance, the slight hurt, or the reciprocal coolness. He simply looked at me with dark eyes that had the quality of genuine attention, the kind that is rare enough to be startling. Your application essay on enzyme inhibition was the best piece of scientific writing I've read from an undergraduate candidate in 6 years, he said. You have an unusual mind. I held his gaze and did not let myself be charmed. Thank you. A corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile. You're welcome. He moved on. I breathed slowly and told myself that the warmth in my chest was simply the room's poor ventilation. By October, I had established a routine that left little room for chaos. Classes from 8 to 2, lab work from 3 to 6, dinner from the dining hall at 6:30, studying until midnight. My grades were not just maintaining the scholarship requirement, they were exceptional by any standard. My biochemistry professor had already asked if I was interested in joining her research lab in the spring semester. My statistics professor had suggested I consider a minor. The stipend, however, was a problem. It was generous by scholarship standards. It was not generous enough by the standards of being a human being who needed to replace a broken laptop, send money home when my mother's hours were cut, and occasionally purchase textbooks that the library's single copy was always checked out of. I did not complain about this. I simply began looking for part-time work that would not conflict with my class schedule or my lab hours. The university had various work-study positions. Most of them paid minimally and involved food service or campus maintenance, which were fine options that I had no particular objection to, except that their hours overlapped with my lab schedule. There was one position listed that I almost skipped past. Administrative assistant, office of the university president. Flexible scheduling, 15 hours per week. Priority given to scholarship recipients. I stared at it for a long time. Then I applied, because I needed the money and because I was perhaps not as sensible as I liked to believe. The president's suite occupied the entire top floor of Ashford's oldest administrative building, a structure with narrow windows and radiators that clanked through the night like restless ghosts. The outer office was managed by a formidable woman named Margaret, who had worked for the university for longer than the current building's plumbing had been operational, and who assessed me on my first day with the focused efficiency of someone cataloging an inventory item. You're the biochemistry scholarship student, she said, which seemed to be how everyone at Ashford identified me. Margaret Osei. You'll work Tuesday and Thursday afternoons and Saturday mornings. You'll handle correspondence routing, filing, calendar coordination for the events I don't manage, and whatever administrative overflow lands on my desk. She handed me a badge. The president works long hours. You may see him in passing. You are not to disturb him unless I specifically instruct you to. The building is on fire, where someone is actively dying. Understood. Any questions? Where are the coffee supplies? She almost smiled. Second cabinet from the left. The president takes his black, no sugar. You'll learn what everyone takes. It matters more than people admit. I learned it. I learned everything quickly, because that was what I did. Within 3 weeks, I could route correspondence with my eyes closed, anticipate which committee reports needed to be cross-referenced, and navigate the complicated ecology of interdepartmental politics that flowed through the office's email system like a slow, treacherous river. Van Kelly, true to Margaret's description, worked hours that suggested he either did not sleep or had a very complicated relationship with rest. He arrived before I did on Tuesday mornings. He was always still there when I left on Thursday evenings. He was polite in the focused, economical way of someone whose attention was a finite resource managed carefully. Good morning, thank you. The Harrington report needs to be cross-referenced with last quarter's budget before the board meeting. He did not treat me differently because I was his scholarship student. He did not treat me differently because I was young or clearly less socially at ease than Margaret, or that I sometimes had chalk on my sleeve from the biochemistry lab. He treated me the way he treated everyone in that office, like a capable professional whose time and work had value. I found this unexpectedly difficult to deal with. I was accustomed to being either overlooked or underestimated, being treated as competent and worthy of respect by someone whose intelligence was obvious and whose standards were high, felt strange, like wearing a coat that fit perfectly, but that you kept expecting to discover was not actually yours. On a rainy Thursday in late October, I was working through a backlog of event correspondence when I reached a scheduling conflict so tangled it required me to consult 3 different calendars simultaneously. I was deep in the logic of it, muttering under my breath, when a voice behind me said, "The alumni gala and the board dinner are a week apart, not 2 days." I spun in my chair. Van Kelly was standing in the doorway between the outer office and his own, a coffee cup in hand, looking at my screen with the relaxed attention of someone who had solved problems like this 1,000 times. The alumni liaison sent a revised date. It came in this morning. It hasn't been updated in the main calendar yet. Ah. He came closer, setting his cup on the edge of my desk with the comfort of familiarity. May I? I turned the monitor slightly toward him. He leaned in to look, and I was abruptly, acutely aware of proximity, of how close he was, of the warmth that came off him, of the scent that suppressants could not entirely block from my awareness, even though my own scent was locked down. He smelled like something clean and deep, like winter air and dark wood. It was not fair, I thought distantly, that an alpha's natural scent could bypass pharmaceutical management, the way water finds cracks in stone. Move the alumni gala to the first weekend of December, he said, straightening. It'll conflict with the faculty senate meeting, but Margaret can negotiate that. Send a draft reschedule notice to the alumni office and copy the faculty senate coordinator. He picked up his coffee cup. Good catch on the revised date. It's my job to catch it. Yes, but catching things that are your job requires actually paying attention. He said it with the same quality of simple statement rather than compliment, and returned to his office. I turned back to my screen and spent a solid 90 seconds telling myself that my elevated heart rate was entirely attributable to having been startled. November came in cold and clear, and with it came the first small cracks in the careful system I had built. My suppressant prescription required a monthly refill. The campus health clinic dispensed it without drama. I had been on the same formulation for 4 years and it was routine. But the clinic ran low on my specific formulation in November. Supply chain issues. The nurse apologized, a known issue that should resolve within 3 weeks. 3 weeks was too long. My cycle, well managed and predictable for years, would be disrupted by even a brief gap. The nurse offered an alternative formulation, a different manufacturer's version of the same compound. She said it was essentially equivalent. She said most patients tolerated the switch without incident. I agreed because I did not have other options. For 2 weeks, the substitute worked fine. I went to class, worked in the lab, filed correspondence in the president's office, studied until midnight, and felt entirely in control. Then, on an evening in late November, while I was in the stacks of a university library looking for a reference text, it began as warmth, a flush along the back of my neck, quickly dismissed as the library's heating being overzealous. Then an ache in my joints, subtle enough to ignore. Then a disorientation that was harder to dismiss, a softening of focus, a flooding awareness of the scents in the room around me, the paper and dust and old bindings, and underneath them, the biological signatures of everyone nearby. I put my hand on the shelf and breathed. Not here, not now. An early heat, suppressed but not stopped, shifted and squeezed by the inconsistency in my medication. The rational part of my mind, still functional, ran through options with the cold efficiency of someone doing triage. My dormitory room was 20 minutes away. The medical center was closer. The administrative building, where I had a legitimate reason to be, and where Margaret kept a supply room I had a key to. I was not thinking clearly. I understood that even as I was doing it. I moved through the library and out into the night air, which helped for about 30 seconds before the cold felt like nothing at all, and walked across the dark campus toward the administrative building because it was closer and I had a key card and I was running out of time. I used my badge to get in. The building was nearly empty at 7 in the evening. Maintenance staff sometimes, but I crossed no one in the lobby or the stairwell. I made it to the fourth floor, to the supply room adjacent to the president's suite, and got inside and locked the door behind me. Then I sat on the floor between a shelving unit and the wall and tried to get my breathing under control and thought about how spectacularly this was going to ruin my scholarship. I do not know how long I was there before the supply room door opened. I had been certain I locked it. I was almost certain I locked it. But the door opened, and light from the outer office fell across the floor, and Van Kelly stood in the doorway. We looked at each other. His reaction was not what I expected. No disgust, no alarm, no visible judgment. His expression moved through something complicated. Recognition, concern, and something tighter and more carefully controlled that I could not name. His jaw set. He stepped inside and closed the door behind him. How long? His voice was very quiet. I'm managing it. Sam. He said my name with a weight that made it impossible to pretend the situation was anything other than what it was. How long has this been happening? An hour, maybe less. I pressed my back against the shelving unit and focused on his face and tried to stabilize. My prescription had a gap. The substitute formula apparently isn't as equivalent as advertised. Do you have anyone you can call? Someone who can be with you? I almost laughed. Felix was a beta and would be mortified and helpful in equal measure, which was not what an early heat required. I had no other friends close enough for this. My family was far. No. He crouched in front of me, keeping careful distance, and studied my face with that focused attention he gave to everything. Can you make it to the medical center? I would really prefer not to walk across campus right now. A pause. The guest suite is 3 doors down. It has a private bathroom and a lock. You can stay there tonight. Nobody else is here. I'll make sure nobody comes in. He held out his hand. Your choice, Sam. I looked at his hand for a long moment. This is not, I said carefully, appropriate. No, he agreed without any of the evasion I had expected. None of this situation is appropriate. But you're in distress, you're alone, and there's a safe space 30 feet away. His hand remained steady. I took his hand. This is where I should explain that what happened next was not as simple as what I just wrote. Taking his hand was not a neutral act, not under those circumstances, not with my suppressants failing, and his natural scent filling the small room, and the heat already rewriting my nervous system from the inside. Biology is not romantic. It does not ask permission. It moves through the body like water moves through limestone, slowly, patiently, inevitably. The guest suite was as he described, private, lockable, with its own bathroom. He showed me in and told me the code for the door and said he would leave water outside and that there was a phone on the desk if I needed anything. He was leaving. He was being correct and careful and professional, and I said his name. I am not proud of what my biology did with his name on my tongue, but I said it, and he stopped with his hand on the door, and the silence was very long and very full. He turned around. What followed is not something I'm going to reconstruct in detail, because it belongs to the category of experiences that language cheapens rather than captures. I will say that he was gentle when he did not need to be, and direct when I needed him to be, and that he stayed until morning, and that when dawn came gray through the guest suite curtains, I felt the heat recede like a tide going out, leaving me clear-headed and exhausted and aware, with full and terrible sober sobriety, of exactly what had happened. He was sitting in the chair by the window. He had slept, I thought, for maybe 2 hours. He looked across the room at me with an expression I could not read. I'm sorry, I said. Don't. His voice was even. You have nothing to apologize for. You're the university president. I work in your office. I'm your scholarship student. I sat up and pushed my hair back. This is 3 separate ethical violations. Yes, they are. And I am the one who stayed. That is on me, not on you. The honesty of that landed somewhere unsteady in my chest. He was quiet for a moment. Nothing changes. Your scholarship is secure. Your position in this office is secure. I won't pretend last night didn't happen, but I won't make it complicated for you. He stood. Unless you want to talk about it. I did not know what I wanted. Not right now. All right. He nodded once. Let me get you coffee. It was such a practical, ordinary thing to say that I almost smiled. Almost. He brought coffee, and I drank it, and then I went back to my dormitory and slept for 14 hours. I did not talk to anyone about what had happened. I did not know how to begin. I told myself for 3 weeks that everything was fine. I went to class, I worked in the lab, I filed correspondence, and coordinated calendars and brought Margaret coffee the way she liked it. And when Van Kelly passed through the outer office, we were professional and quiet with each other in a way that was different from before, and that I suspected Margaret noticed but chose not to comment on, because Margaret was perceptive in the way of people who have survived long enough in institutional environments to know what not to see. He did not bring up what had happened. He did not treat me differently. He was, in every visible way, exactly what he had promised to be: consistent, fair, and careful. I kept telling myself that everything was fine. Then December arrived, and things were not fine. It began with exhaustion that went beyond what my schedule explained. I was tired all the time, deeply and specifically tired in a way that sleep did not resolve. Then came the nausea, not constant, but arriving in ambush, most often in the mornings, or when I was in the biochemistry lab, surrounded by chemical smells. Then a sensitivity to scent so acute that the dining hall became difficult to manage. The perfume of the woman who sat next to me in statistics class made my eyes water. And the simple smell of the coffee I routinely brought to the president's office made me stop dead in the hallway outside and breathe through my mouth. I was a biochemistry student. I knew what these symptoms added up to. I bought 3 tests at a pharmacy 2 bus stops from campus. I did them at 2 in the morning in my locked dormitory bathroom, sitting on the edge of the tub with my heart doing something that was less like beating and more like a sustained act of controlled panic. 3 positives. I sat there for a long time. A scholarship student, 21 years old, an Omega who had spent 4 years making himself unremarkable, invisible, safe. An Omega who was now unmistakably pregnant with the child of the university president who administered his scholarship. The irony was almost impressive. I pressed my back against the cold wall of the bathroom and stared at the ceiling and tried to make my mind work properly. Options. I needed to organize this into options, the way I organized every problem, because panic was a physiological state with no useful outputs, and I could not afford it. Option 1, end the pregnancy. Legal, accessible, private. Would solve the immediate logistical problem. I sat with this option for a long time, and then I sat with the strange, quiet fact that my body felt ferociously opposed to it. Not on any philosophical grounds I could articulate cleanly, but on some deep biological level that refused to detach from what was already happening. I was an Omega. This was, biologically, something my body recognized as catastrophically important. I could override it. I was aware I could override it. I also was aware, sitting on that bathroom floor, that I did not want to. This was not a rational position. I acknowledged that fully. This was not sensible. I was 21, on a scholarship, with a part-time job and no safety net, and a complicated situation involving the most powerful person at my institution. There was no practical argument for what I felt, sitting on that bathroom floor, holding 3 positive tests, thinking about the person who had been gentle when he did not need to be. I was not going to be rational about this. I could see that clearly, even as I made the decision. This produced a cascade of secondary fears so comprehensive that I had to list them to manage them. That he would feel obligated. That he would feel trapped. That he would question whether I had done this deliberately. An Omega targeting an alpha president for financial security. A narrative I had seen applied to others, and that I found both insulting and terrifying to be associated with. That I would lose the scholarship. That I would lose the job. That I would have to leave Ashford, having failed at the only extraordinary thing I had ever been given. Option 3, say nothing and figure it out alone. I had been figuring things out alone for most of my life. I was very good at it. The question was whether the scale of this particular problem exceeded my solo capacity. I thought it probably did, but I was not ready to face option 2. Not yet. Not tonight. I put the tests in a paper bag and put the bag in my backpack, and went to bed and did not sleep. And in the morning I called my mother and talked to her about nothing in particular for 40 minutes, because I needed to hear her voice, and because I could not yet tell her what I needed to tell her. I lasted 11 days. In those 11 days, I ate crackers in my dormitory room to manage the nausea, wore a scarf in the lab because the chemical smells had become overwhelming, and continued to function with the mechanical determination of someone running on pure stubbornness. Felix noticed that I was pale and asked if I was sleeping. I told him I was fine. Margaret noticed that I was avoiding the coffee machine and gave me a sharp look that I managed not to flinch under. Van Kelly noticed too. Of course he did. On the 11th day, a Thursday, he stopped in the outer office at the end of the day when Margaret had already left. I was finishing the last of a filing task, moving slowly because my back had begun to ache in the particular way that felt deeply, specifically biological. Stay a moment, he said. It was not a command. It was the kind of request that carries weight because of who is making it. I stayed. He sat in the chair across from my desk, rather than behind his own desk, which created a less hierarchical geometry, and he looked at me in the particular way that meant he had been watching and had seen something. Something is wrong, he said. I'm tired. End of semester. You've been avoiding the coffee for 2 weeks, you look like you're managing constant nausea, and you stopped wearing your usual said product. He said it matter-of-factly, the way he said everything. I'm not asking as your employer. I'm asking as someone who is concerned. I thought about deflecting. I was very good at deflecting, but I was also 11 days into carrying a secret that was getting heavier every day, and I was tired, and there was something about the way he was looking at me, with that quality of genuine attention, the real kind, the kind that cost something, that made the architecture of my deflection feel suddenly inadequate. I found out 11 days ago, I said. I've been trying to figure out the right way to tell you. The silence that followed was extremely dense. He was very still. He was, I realized, the kind of person who went still when things were significant, who did not leak his reactions before he had processed them. I watched his face and could not read it at all. Tell me, he said quietly. I'm pregnant. The stillness continued for another moment. Then he said, How certain are you? 3 tests, all positive. I'm a biochemistry student. I kept my voice level through an act of sustained will. I know what 3 positives mean. Yes. He stood and walked to the window. His back was to me. I could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hand pressed briefly against the glass. How are you physically? Are you all right? That was not the question I expected first. I had braced for logistics, for legalities, for careful institutional extraction from responsibility. The question of my physical state was so immediate and genuine that it knocked something loose in my chest. I'm managing, I said. The nausea is unpleasant. My energy is low. Have you seen a doctor? Not yet. He turned from the window. You need to see a doctor. There are specialists the university has access to. Private, not through the campus clinic. He paused. Unless you'd prefer to use your own provider, I want you to have the option. I stared at him. You're being very calm. I'm not calm. His voice was measured, but something underneath it was not. I'm controlling myself because losing control right now won't help you. I absorbed that. I need you to understand something, I said. I did not plan this. The substituted prescription, the heat, none of it was planned. I'm not trying to. I stopped because the next words felt humiliating to have to say. I know. He said it simply, and with a directness that left no room for doubt. I know you didn't plan this, Sam. I know who you are. I've read your file. I've watched you work for months. I know the difference between calculation and circumstance. He came back and sat in the chair again, closer this time. This is my responsibility as much as it is yours. More, in some ways. I'm the one who stayed. You said that the morning after. It's still true now. I looked at my hands. I've thought about the options. Tell me. I'm keeping the pregnancy. I said it as flatly as I could, because I needed to say it clearly before anything else. I'm not asking you to be involved. I'm not asking you for anything, actually. I told you because you had the right to know. What you do with the information is up to you. The silence after that was different from the first one. Warmer somehow, or more complicated. What you're asking me to do, he said slowly, is to know that you're carrying my child and walk away. I'm not asking that. I'm saying it's an option I would not hold against you. He was quiet for a long moment. It's not an option I'm interested in. I looked up. We need to talk about what this means, he said. All of it. Your scholarship, the position here, my role, your needs. It needs to be a real conversation, not a crisis decision. He leaned forward slightly. Will you let me be part of figuring this out? You're the university president. I'm also apparently the father of your child. He said it without flinching. The second fact is more relevant than the first, I think. I looked at him for a long time. The evening light through the office windows was going from gold to gray, and the building was very quiet. And he was looking at me with that same quality of attention that had unsettled me from the very first day. All right, I said. Talk. He talked. And I talked. And we stayed in that office, until the building's automated systems switched off the lobby lights, which was the first time I had ever seen Van Kelly ignore a practical detail and not notice it. The conversation that night covered a great deal of ground. It did not cover everything. There were things I was not yet ready to say, and things he clearly had not yet organized into words. But we talked about the scholarship, which he told me was legally separate from any personal conduct, and which could not be revoked for anything that had happened, and about the position, and the fact that a pregnant Omega, working in the university president's office, was going to become visible and talked about eventually, and what we both thought about that. He was pragmatic about things I expected him to be pragmatic about. He was surprising about other things. You should move out of the dormitory, he said, toward midnight, when we were both running on the dregs of our energy. I can't afford. I have a property, a house near the north edge of campus. It's been empty for 2 years. The rent is nominal. He looked at my expression. This is not charity. You are carrying my child. I am not going to have you managing a pregnancy in a dormitory room with a shared bathroom. People manage pregnancies in much harder circumstances than a dormitory room. Yes, and they shouldn't have to when a better option exists. He was firm but not cold. But I want you to have the option. I thought about the bathroom I shared with Felix. I thought about mornings with nausea and the narrow bed, and the dining hall's overwhelming smells. I thought about pride and practicality, and which of them would actually serve me in the coming months. I'll consider it, I said. He accepted that without pushing, which was one of the things I was beginning to understand about him. He pushed on substance and let go of everything else. I moved into the house in the second week of December, between semesters. It was small and old and smelled like wood and stone, with a garden that was currently bare and brown, but which, in the way that bare winter gardens do, gave the strong impression of what it would become in another season. My mother called it lovely when I showed her on a video call, then immediately asked about the landlord's situation, with the particular frequency of someone who had raised a child alone and learned to detect complications from a distance. How complicated? She asked. Very, I said. That was the question my mother always asked, and it was always the hardest one. I looked around the small kitchen with its old windows and its sense of quiet, and thought about the complicated person who had given me the use of it, and about the small new reality taking shape inside me. I don't know yet, I said honestly. I think I'm getting there. Van came to the house on a Sunday in late December, 3 days before the winter holiday began. He knocked, which I appreciated. He had a key for emergencies but had told me he would always knock. I had cleaned the kitchen and tried to make the living room look less like a student's emergency installation, though I had not fully succeeded. He came in and looked around at my stacks of textbooks and the biochemistry models I had arranged on the window ledge and did not appear to find anything wrong with the aesthetic. He had brought groceries. The specificity of them was slightly alarming. Things I had mentioned in passing over the past 2 weeks, the crackers I was eating constantly, the particular tea that helped with nausea, specific fruit, because I had said the smell of certain things was worse than others. He had been paying attention with the focused comprehensiveness that characterized everything he did. You didn't have to, I started. I wanted to. He set the bags on the kitchen table. How are you feeling today? Better than yesterday. I watched him begin to put things away with the comfortable familiarity of someone who found kitchens legible and useful. You know where things go. I've been in this kitchen before. I used to come here often. He paused, a box of crackers in his hand. It belonged to my grandmother. When she died, she left it to me. I couldn't bring myself to sell it or rent it to a stranger. He had not told me that before. It landed differently than the abstract fact of an empty house. This was somewhere he had memories, somewhere that mattered. He had given me somewhere he had memories. Van, I said his name, and then did not have the next sentence ready. He looked at me from across the kitchen. In the gray winter light through the old windows, he looked less like the university president and more like a person, which was something I needed to hold on to. What you're doing, I said. The house, the groceries, the doctor's appointments you've scheduled, the way you're handling all of this. I need to know if you're doing it because you feel obligated or because you want to. He set down the crackers and turned to face me fully. Those aren't mutually exclusive. I know, but which is more? He was quiet for a moment, and the old radiator ticked into the silence. I've thought about you since the orientation ceremony, he said, before everything else. You sat there and didn't applaud, and looked at me like you'd already decided I was a variable in a problem you were solving. I found it genuinely interesting. A pause. I've found you interesting every day since. I held his gaze. That's not the same as wanting this. No, but I do want this. He said it with the same quality as everything else he said, directly, without ornamentation. I want you to be well. I want the child to be healthy. I want to figure out what we are to each other, if you're willing. None of that is obligation. I crossed the kitchen and stood in front of him, close enough that I could see the fine tension around his eyes that I had learned to read as feeling he was managing carefully. I put my hand flat against his chest, over his heart, and felt it beat. I'm scared, I said. I need you to know that. I'm not good at needing help, and I'm not good at trust, and I am 21 years old with a scholarship and a complicated situation, and I am genuinely terrified of getting this wrong. I know. His hand came up and covered mine, gently. I'm not 21, and I've had more time to build resources against fear, and I am still afraid of getting this wrong. His thumb moved across my knuckles. I think being afraid and doing it anyway is probably the right approach. I stayed there for a moment, feeling his heartbeat, steadying my own. Then, that's what we do. He did not make a grand gesture of it. He simply moved his hand to my shoulder and steered me toward the kitchen table and told me to sit down while he finished putting things away and made tea. And I sat and watched him move through the kitchen that used to be his grandmother's. And something that had been wound very tightly inside me began, slowly, to ease. The spring semester began with no announcement, because there was nothing to announce. I returned to classes and to the office, and if anyone thought anything of the fact that the scholarship student was no longer living in the dormitory, they did not say so to my face. The pregnancy was not yet showing in the middle of winter clothes. I had more time than I had initially thought to manage it quietly. Felix noticed I had moved out and gave me a look that said he had noticed other things too, and then said, "You okay?" And when I said yes, he accepted it without interrogation, which was why he was my best friend. Van was deliberate in the way he handled things. He did not change the professional dynamic of the office. He was still my employer in that space, still focused and economical and correct. But he sent messages in the evenings to ask how I was feeling. He came to the house twice a week, on some occasions with food, on some occasions to simply sit in the same room while I studied and he worked on his own documents. He came to the first prenatal appointment and sat in the waiting room reading an institutional policy report. And when the doctor told us the preliminary indicators were excellent and that everything was developing normally, he closed the report and said, "Good," in a tone that I had not heard from him before, quieter than his usual voice, carrying something that was not professional relief. I was falling in love with him. I was aware of it the way you are aware of the season changing, not all at once, not in a single dramatic moment, but in accumulation, in small, daily evidences that add up until one morning you look outside and the trees are entirely different from what they were a month ago. I was terrified of it. I was terrified because I did not know what he felt. Not really, not in the clear and declarative way that I needed. He was kind and present and careful, and he had said he wanted this, but wanting to be responsible and being in love were very different things, and I was not going to confuse them. I had built my entire life on not confusing them. I did not tell him what I was feeling. I continued to be my most controlled self in his presence, which was becoming increasingly difficult as the weeks passed and the house on the north edge of campus started feeling like mine in ways I had not anticipated and had not planned for. February brought a campus crisis that had nothing to do with us and everything to do with the institution, a budget dispute with the state funding committee, a public confrontation between two senior faculty members that found its way onto social media, and a protest organized by the Graduate Students Association over stipend rates. Van was navigating all of it simultaneously with the focused calm of someone who had seen worse and knew that the way through crisis was to be very clear about what mattered most and very patient about everything else. I watched him work through it from the outer office and thought that I would have liked to know him in a world where none of the complicating factors existed. Then I thought that perhaps none of the complicating factors were incidental. Perhaps this was precisely the world in which I had been meant to know him, complication and all. The third week of February, the situation shifted in a new direction. A member of the Board of Trustees, a woman named Hargreave, who had a reputation for institutional conservatism and a personal aversion to anything she categorized as impropriety, sent a formal inquiry to the office about reports she had heard. The inquiry was, on the surface, about the work-study program. The question it was actually asking was whether there was an inappropriate relationship between the president and a scholarship student. Margaret brought it to Van. I heard their voices through the office door, muffled but audible in tone. When the door opened, His expression was carefully neutral. "This is going to become public," he said, when we were alone. "I want you to be prepared for that." "I know. I have been waiting for it." "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to tell the truth." He said it as simply as he said everything. "I won't lie to the board. I won't minimize what happened or obscure my role in it. I will take full responsibility for the position I was in and the choices I made." I looked at him. "That could cost you the presidency." "It might." He was even, neither resigned nor afraid. "I'm not going to protect my position by distorting what happened to you." Something cracked open in my chest. I looked away and then looked back. "You should know," I said, and my voice was less controlled than I intended it to be, "that I'm not going to let them frame this as exploitation. What happened was not simple. What we are is not simple." He looked at me carefully. "What are we?" This was the question I had been circling for months. I had been waiting for him to ask it in a context where I could not deflect, and now he was asking it in a context where I could not deflect, and I understood that this was the moment where I either said the honest thing or retreated forever into the careful, controlled version of myself that had kept me safe and lonely for 21 years. I crossed the office and stood in front of him. "I'm in love with you," I said. "I've been trying not to be for months. It hasn't worked." The expression on his face was not surprise. It was something older and more complicated than surprise. Relief, I thought, and something that had been held under pressure for a long time and was now finally allowed to move. He put his hands on either side of my face, carefully, the way he did everything when it mattered. "I have been in love with you," he said, "since October, since the day you stood in the hallway outside this office and stopped because the coffee smell bothered you, and I watched you collect yourself with that particular stubbornness you have, and I thought that you were the most quietly remarkable person I had ever seen." I stared at him. "You said nothing for months. You were 21, pregnant, in a precarious institutional situation, and doing everything in your power to retain control of your own life." His thumbs moved gently against my temples. "I was not going to add the complication of my feelings until you were ready for them." I absorbed this. "That was both very respectful and incredibly frustrating," I said. Something genuinely warm moved through his expression. "I know. I'm sorry." "No, you're not." "No," he agreed. "I'm not." I closed the distance between us. The kiss was not desperate or dramatic. It was the kind of kiss that feels like recognition, like something that has been true for a long time being finally, simply, said out loud. The board meeting was formal, which I had expected, and difficult, which I had also expected, and shorter than either of us anticipated, which surprised us both. Van stood in front of the board and said exactly what he had told me he would say, the truth, clearly and without self-protective distortion. He said that a situation had developed that he had not sought and had not handled with the institutional caution it deserved, and that he accepted full responsibility for that. He said that the student involved had done nothing wrong, and that any institutional response that penalized them would be incorrect and would face legal challenge. He said that his personal position was secondary to the integrity of the institution's treatment of its students. Hargreave asked a series of sharp questions. He answered them without deflection. Another board member, an older man named Calloway who had been quiet throughout, asked what Van intended going forward. "To continue leading this institution as I have, to the best of my ability," Van said, "and to be a present and responsible partner to Sam Mitchell and to our child, whatever decisions this board makes." Calloway looked at him for a long time, then observed that in his experience the board had seen presidents try to hide things, and that the absence of evasion in this room was notable, and that he was inclined to address the situation as a private matter that had no bearing on Van's professional conduct record, which was exemplary by any measure. Hargreave objected. Calloway asked for a vote. Van retained his position, 4-2. He called me from the car afterward. He said, "It's done." And there was a quality to his voice that told me the steadiness had cost him more than he had shown in that room. "Come home," I said. I said it without thinking, and then realized what I had said. Home, as if the house with the garden and the old radiator and the biochemistry models on the window ledge was home for both of us now. A pause on the line, then quietly and with complete certainty, "I'm coming." Spring came to the garden in the way that spring comes everywhere, unannounced and suddenly total. The bare brown branches produced green almost overnight, and the flower beds that I had not known were flower beds revealed themselves in color. And I spent an afternoon sitting on the back step in a sweater that was already too warm, watching it happen with the absorbed attention of someone discovering that the world still works the way it always has. My body was changing in ways that were daily and sometimes alarming, and often strange, and occasionally, quietly, wondrous. The child had begun to move, and the first time it happened, I had been alone in the kitchen, and I stood very still for a long moment, and then called Van because he had asked me specifically to tell him when it happened. He answered on the second ring, and I said, "Something moved," and there was a silence on the other end, and then he said, "I'm coming over." He arrived in 20 minutes, still in his work clothes, tie slightly loosened, and I took his hand without preamble and pressed it against the place where it had happened, and we stood in the kitchen, in the evening light, and waited together, and it happened again, and the expression on his face was one I had never seen before and did not have a word for, and knew I would remember for the rest of my life. He stayed that night. He stayed most nights now. We had not announced anything because we did not feel that anything required announcement. It was simply the accumulation of what we were, settling into form, the way water settles into the shape of whatever holds it. Felix asked me in the spring if I was happy. It was, he explained with complete seriousness, a question being tracked by multiple interested parties. "Are you conducting a survey?" I asked. "There's a betting pool," he said. "About what?" "About whether the university president would show up to finals week to carry your books." He held up a hand to forestall my response. For what it's worth, I bet yes. The odds were good. I shook my head and did not quite succeed in not laughing. Van did not show up to carry my books. He did, however, appear at the end of my final exam with coffee that I could not currently drink, and herbal tea that I could, and he walked across the spring campus beside me with his jacket over his arm and his attention entirely on me in the particular way that I had stopped trying to tell myself meant nothing. There is a conversation I keep returning to from that summer. We were sitting in the garden in the long evening light. The garden that had turned out to be full of roses and lavender and something I could not identify that smelled extraordinary in the early dark. I was far enough along that getting comfortable required planning, and Van had arranged things so that I was comfortable without me having to ask, which was something he was very good at, anticipating without managing, caring without overriding. "Tell me something you haven't told me," I said. It had become something we did, asking that question, because there was still so much of each other we were discovering. He thought about it with the focused consideration he brought to everything. "I was going to leave the presidency," he said, "before you. I had decided that the work was not matching the cost, and that I would complete my current term and not renew." I looked at him. "What changed?" "You wrote an essay about enzyme inhibition that I read at 2 in the morning in this very garden." He was quiet for a moment. It made me think about what it would mean to waste something with genuine potential. I started thinking about the scholarship differently, about what this institution could actually be if it took seriously the idea that excellence has no demographic. He paused. "You changed what I thought the job was worth." I sat with that for a moment. That is an enormous amount of responsibility to place on an essay. It was an excellent essay, Van. It was also written by an excellent person. He looked at me with the directness that I had stopped finding startling and had begun to rely on the way you rely on things that are always there. "You changed how I thought about the work. And then you changed everything else." I reached across and found his hand. "I came to Ashford to be invisible," I said. "I had a very clear plan. Get the degree, maintain the GPA, graduate, disappear. How is that plan going?" "Catastrophically off track." "Are you sorry?" I looked at the garden, the roses in the evening light, the house that had been his grandmother's and was now somehow ours. I put his hand against my side and felt the small, insistent movement that had been answering every question I had not known I was asking. "No," I said, "not even slightly." Our daughter was born in September, which felt like something arranged by whoever arranges coincidences. 1 year almost exactly from the day I had stood in the administrative building's lobby with my badge and my exhaustion and my absolute determination to be invisible and unremarkable and thoroughly, permanently unnoticed. She was small and vehement about existing, and she had Van's dark eyes and my stubbornness, or at least so my mother said, when she held her in the delivery room with her eyes full of tears. While my brother made a video of the whole thing without asking anyone's permission and narrated it in a whisper as if he were a wildlife documentarian who had stumbled upon something extraordinary. Van sat beside the bed and held her with a carefulness that I recognized, the same quality of attention he gave to things that mattered most, focused and complete and entirely present. She gripped his finger in her tiny fist with the absolute conviction of someone who has decided that this is hers and that is final. He looked at me over her head, and that saw the expression I had no word for, the one from the kitchen when she first moved, and something in me completed itself like a proof that has finally resolved. I need to ask you something, he said. Now? It seems like the right moment. I was 3 hours out of labor and running on whatever the physiological version of pure adrenaline is. And the most important person I had ever made was sleeping on her father's chest. Ask, I said. I would like you to consider building a life with me, he said. Not because of her, though she is wonderful. Because of you, because I want to wake up in that house with you for the rest of my life, and argue with you about paper filing systems, and watch you be brilliant at things I will never fully understand, and grow the roses with you every spring. He paused, and because I have been in love with you since October, which is a fact I intend to stop keeping quiet about. I looked at him, this impossible, careful, honest man who had knocked on every door instead of assuming it was his to open, who had told the truth to a board of trustees when lying would have been so much easier, who had bought crackers because I mentioned them in passing and learned what tea helped and come to every appointment and said what he meant without ornamentation. The rose in the northeast corner needs replanting, I said. The roots are wrong. I know. I've been planning to address it. And I'm keeping my name. I never suggested otherwise. And I'm finishing my degree and then the graduate program, and you are not going to make that complicated because of institutional affiliation. I have already removed myself from any committee that reviews your department's work. He had done that quietly in February, as soon as things between us had become clear. Because of course he had. Because this was who he was. I exhaled. Then yes, I said. I'm building a life with you. Our daughter made a small sound in her sleep, as if she had been following the negotiation and found the outcome acceptable. We named her Rowan, because it suited her, and because the rowan tree outside the house was the first thing I had seen come back to life in the garden, and because she was, in all the ways that mattered, the turning point from which everything else grew. 2 years from the day the scholarship letter arrived, creased and refolded, taped now along the worst of the fold lines, kept in a box on the desk where I study. I am finishing my second year of graduate research, my work on enzyme inhibition, having grown into a project my supervisor calls extraordinary and which I call ongoing because it is never done, because the work is always in the middle of becoming something. Rowan is 15 months old and has discovered that pulling books off shelves produces a satisfying noise and that her father makes a different face about it than I do. And she is methodically exploiting this information with the focused intelligence of someone running an experiment. My supervisor tells me when Rowan accompanies me to the lab on days when the childcare arrangement shifts, a natural observer. I tell her that observation runs in the family. Van is finishing a strategic plan for the university's scholarship program, expanded now, 3 new recipients per year, with a housing provision added specifically because he knows what it costs to manage a scholarship without adequate support, what it costs to be excellent and underfunded, and trying to remain invisible and composed. He does not mention my role in inspiring this. I know it regardless. Margaret still runs the outer office with the efficiency of an institution unto herself. She brings Rowan a small wrapped present on her birthday and pretends that this does not make her smile. And she does not succeed at the pretending, and nobody mentions it. Felix won the betting pool. He bought everyone in Harrow Hall coffee with the winnings and texted me a photograph of the receipt as evidence. I was not surprised by any of this. We planted the rose in the northeast corner properly last spring, dug out the old roots, and reset it with the patience that roses require and that gardening teaches. It bloomed in June, deep red against the old stone of the house wall. Van stood in the garden, looking at it with the expression he gets when something he has been patient about finally arrives, and I stood beside him and thought about all the things you cannot see coming, and all the things that turn out to be exactly right because of that. I did not plan any of this. I planned to be invisible, to be excellent, to be unnoticed. I planned to arrive and survive and graduate and disappear, leaving the smallest possible mark, taking up the smallest possible space. I had spent years practicing smallness and had gotten very good at it. Instead, I arrived, and someone paid attention, and everything changed in the specific and irreversible way that real things change. Not all at once, not dramatically, but in accumulation, in coffee in the morning, and crackers in winter, and a hand held out in a dim room, and a question asked honestly and answered the same way, building into something I did not have a category for and have since stopped trying to categorize. What I have is not a category. It is a house with old radiators and a garden with roses and a daughter with her father's eyes and my stubbornness and work that I love and a person who tells me the truth and knocks before entering and showed up with the right tea when I couldn't drink coffee and has been paying attention, genuinely and specifically, since October. What I have is, quite simply, everything, and it began as real things tend to, not with a plan, but with a letter arriving and a door opening and the specific, irreversible decision to walk through. If you made it to the end, you're my kind of person. Leave a subscribe, comment down your favorite part of the story. It means the world.